Okay. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's session, Arts and Digital World, Inspirations from Canada. We've got a traditional welcome with Lyndon Davis. It's a little bit delayed, so we'll come back to Lyndon shortly. But in the meantime, I'm going to introduce Inga Petri from Strategic Moves in Canada, who's going to be our facilitator and leader of today's conversation, and she's going to kick us off. Thank you very much. Thanks, Inga.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Norm. To start with, I want to acknowledge where I'm residing. I live in Whitehorse, Yukon, in northern Canada, on the traditional territories of the Tahnquechan Council and Kwanlundan First Nation. Those are self-governing nations that have modern treaties that they struck with Canada and the territory of the Yukon in 2002 and 2005. It's a very different thing. More than half of all of these self-governing agreements that exist in Canada are in fact in the Yukon. And it changes how we relate to each other in ways that I very much appreciate being a beneficiary of. The conversation today does two things. I've assembled a number of colleagues from across Canada who are joining us this evening. Canada time, your morning or early afternoon in Australia, of course, to talk about the Digital Strategy Fund, which was created about 4 years ago. Mark Fonnell is joining us from Canada Council. He's a program officer there, dealing with the Digital Strategy Fund for the last while. And most of us who are on this call, so that would be Jessa Agalo from Arts Pond, Tammy Lee with Culture Creates, Laurie Gillies, with the Atlantic Presenters Association, and myself are in fact working on projects funded by the Digital Strategy Fund. And Randy Miller is also joining us. He is acting director, I believe, of the Canada Arts Presentation Fund and the Canada Arts Training Fund. And part of your colleagues within the Department of Canadian Heritage also deal with cultural spaces and some other programs that would be relevant here this evening. So there's two parts of the conversation. One is the Digital Strategy Fund, which leads, of course, into digital transformation, which leads to, my goodness, COVID happened about a year ago. And sort of the acceleration that the reality of life basically moving to be digital for a while has created, both acceleration and challenge, opportunity and pain. Really depends on where you're sitting, of course. One of the things I've noticed is that digital is real. We keep saying it's virtual when it's digital, but it's actually real. And I think that's a realization that is, to me, has become an important little mantra to say, yeah, that's digital, but it doesn't make it virtual or not real or somehow removed from human experience. Digital is also extremely local, as it is extremely global. So that's one of the things that happens when none of us get to leave our houses. All of a sudden you're talking to your neighbor through this medium, or you're seeing artists who are 2 blocks away through this kind of a digital medium. So part of, just to set us up, part of what I've been interested in is to sort of think about the intersection of the human relationship, the business, and the technology, right? Which is sort of call it human-centered design thinking, something like that. And I think so part of what we'll try to do this evening is to illuminate what's happened in Canada. You'll have opportunities to post questions, comments, observations about what you'll be hearing. And then in the second half of our time together, we'll switch a little bit into COVID response. And there's a lot of intrinsic connections, obviously. But that's when you'll start to hear a little bit more about what Canada has done quite proactively to try to protect, in a way, the arts and culture producing sector. With that, what I would like to do is I would like to invite Mark Fonnell to give us a bit of an overview of the Digital Strategy Fund, what it is, what it does, perhaps how much money has been spent, and where all of that is at. Mark, I'll hand it over to you from here.
Yeah, thank you, Inga. Yeah, I'm really happy to be here. And first of all, I would like to say that I'm living in Tiatika. It's also known as Montreal, which is situated on a traditional an unceded territory of the Konyen-Kin-Haka, also known as Mohawk, a place which has long served as a site of meeting, exchange among many First Nations, including Konyen-Kin-Haka, of course, of the Confederacy from Huron, Wendat, Abenaki, and Anishinaabeg. But actually, the office of the Canada Council is situated in an unceded territory also of the Anishinaabeg people. Voila. I'm from French descendancy, as you might hear in my accent. So bear with me when I use the beautiful English language that I love so much for this direct and his poetry I found anyway. So, and bear also with me while I'm going to share my screen, you know, to do a presentation, show you a presentation, some slide. I will not take too much time, but since you know, since DSF is one part of the discussion, I thought it was good for you to know what we have done, where it comes from, where we want to go if we know it. Anyway, you'll discover that. Let me just share my screen here. Okay. So I guess everybody can see that. Yes? No, you don't? Okay, wait a minute.
Not quite yet. There we are.
Now you should.
Now it's coming on. Thank you.
Perfect, thanks. Okay. So, okay, so, well, Digital Strategy Fund is time limited strategy fund, and it was aligned. And I'm going to talk about the Digital Strategy Fund in the past because it's ending in March 2021. That doesn't mean it's going to be the end of the support of Canada Council for Digital Transformation, but let's go back to the start of it. So it was launched in 2017, and the goal was really to stimulate the digital transformation of the art sector through support for strategic collaborative initiative. And the term collaborative here is really important. We'll see that later on. So the fund has the following objective: to stimulate the digital transformation, clearly, but also to build digital knowledge, skills, and capacity, to address issue of access and enhance artistic experience, encourage participation and citizen engagement, and this part was really strong, adopt new ways of working in digital environment. So for all this, what we have built, basically what I just mentioned were the three components that we offer to the art sector itself. So this slide is showing a bit the evolution of the Canada Council approach to supporting digital transformation over the past 4 years now. So we tried to take an iterative approach actually in what we were offering to the art sector. So, and because of course, you know, it started in 2017, there's a lot of things we didn't know, we were expecting, but we learned so much during those 4 years. So, and we were trying to address the needs and the gaps along the way. So I mentioned it was launched in actually August 2017. And it was based on many research activity like survey, environment scan, direct interview with some people and key player and the art sector itself, consultation. We did some digital day event, etc. And one of the report that was produced was the Arts and Digital World, the Literature Review Executive Summary that was prepared by a consultant, not to name it, it was Nordicity. And it was done for Canada Council for the Arts. And this report really explored the way artists, art organizations, and art founders in Canada and internationally had adapted to and helped shape the digital world. So consider also the impact of digital technology in the arts and situate these development in the context of the Council's strategic plan, Shaping a New Future, which was for 2016 to 2021. So this strategic plan really presented the council digital ambition, if you want. So the fund consisted on three major funding components, as I mentioned before. So basically, we offered three components for the art sector to apply to. So the first component was digital literacy and intelligence, public access to the arts and citizen engagement, and transformation of organizational model. So the assessment criteria were in phases on the need for collaboration and partnership, openness and knowledge sharing, an iterative approach also, and risk-taking. And this last part is important because the fund was from the start a risk-taking fund. And it's not an investment fund neither, so it's really a transformational fund. So, all the components at the start were designed with both single and multi-phase option. After a certain time, the digital literacy component was just available for a single phase, not multi-phase. So actually, those three components was the foundation of the Digital Strategy Fund, but we had a block along the way. And the slide there showed what we did. We just realized after the first year that it was a bit hard to, we didn't have a quick, easy access to the fund because you had to know that we were offering grant from 1,000 to $500,000. And sometimes, you know, we didn't acknowledge during the first year that some organization or individual, because individual could apply as well, would need a faster access to the fund. So we had at the start only one deadline, which was also a problem. So in 2018-19, we introduced the possibility to apply for on a rolling deadline, so no deadline basically, for $50,000. So that was a really great improvement to access the fund. Also, we launched a special initiative for core grant recipient, because what we call core grant is that we are supporting some organization to their basic needs, if you want. Like, everybody knows what a core grant should be. If you don't know, raise your question later on. And so that gives the possibility for about 400 organizations in Canada to simply have $50,000 to hire a consultant or other people that could help them to do a digital assessment of their organization. So where were they, where they wanted to go, etc. So basically to also almost develop a digital strategy for the future. So that was really appreciated by the art sector, clearly. And also the year 3, we propose a Creation Accelerator phase 1. Phase 1 is simply because Creation Accelerator, what we did is that we partner with CBC, which is a national TV network here in Canada. And so we basically match creator with producer in CBC. And then one of the main obligation was to create something that could be disseminated or presented in one of the platform, digital platform or CBC. Another thing we have developed was the UK-Canada Immersive Partnership, which also put in contact and in partnership creator from Canada with creator from UK and producer also, and vice versa. And the 4th year, which is 2021, well, COVID hit, as Inga mentioned, so we had to react really fast. So we proposed a digital original, which was micro grant, if you want, of $5,000 that actually individual creator and also group could access. And it was so popular, we received more than 4,000 something application. And on all of this, we supported a lot of those micro creation. Also there, you had to propose something that could be presented on a digital platform. And of course, we introduced also the rolling deadline for all of our components, because the first one was just for digital literacy. We also went into phase 2 of our Creation Accelerator with CBC, and we extended the UK-Canada Immersive Talent Development. So those are the things we have done. Beside that, we also have proposed a lot of but other initiative that was not necessarily the main objective at the start of the Digital Strategy Fund. And all of this was because of the COVID situation. We have, we put like a lot of flexibility for giving time in our rolling deadline. So basically, we were more flexible in the criteria we had. And one of the criteria actually that we have in all of our components was the partnership. But we realized that in the COVID time and situation, all the art sector was like, oof, you know, in French, I would say we have a jambette. So it's like if you make someone just fall. So, so that was really difficult. So we said, okay, let's not try to have any partnership for a 3 month period. Actually, it was a 4-month period. And also, we realized that people needed more creation to present online work and online piece of work. So in order to have the artists continue to work and the presenter being able to present, we were really flexible into our criteria. For example, normally the fund will not support any creation, like so not any work, new work of art, neither presentation, that it's been digital or not. That was not our mandate because of their program in Canada Council do that very well. So we were really there for the digital transformation or using digital technology or thinking to do things differently. So, but we extended or we were more flexible during that time. And it really paid off too. And we were really happy about that. Next one, I'm gonna try to speed up here. It's money, you know, money talks, it seems. So this is the kind of money we spent so far. The first year, as you see, I would say the art sector, even though we did a lot of survey, interview, etc., most of the art sector were a bit like, not surprised, but didn't know exactly what the fund was. And really, to be honest, the fund itself didn't know itself neither. So it was, it's funny to say, but we were learning. And so at the start, there was not a lot of successful applicant because of all those things. Second year though, that's when I arrived in the fund, and that's not why it raised up, but that was because of all the change we did before. Then we went up, like, so the success rate was really high. And then, as you can see, the third year, we spent 20.5 million. And this year will be really the biggest year because of all the other initiatives that we put in place as well. So this year, we're planning to spend 34.2 million. And what you see, the 2.7 and 1.2, those are more like involvement that the fund have taken, like I mentioned, the UK exchange, those kind of things. Those are not really special or exceptional grant that we're giving. It's more like initiative that the Canada Council proposed to the art sector. So the impact, well, now we're at the end of the fund. Of course, you know, at the start of 2020, we were really like going into doing a lot of research on the impact, starting to do that. We were caught by surprise like everybody else, so we had to paddle a lot. So we were like, we started, of course, the research, the impact that the fund had, but we could not do everything we wanted to do. Now we're about to arrive where we wanted to be, so that's quite interesting. But we're looking back in order to look forward, basically. That's what we're trying to do. So we're teaming up, of course, with our research department with the Canada Council, and we want to better understand actually the key success and challenge in terms of design, implementation of the fund, the initial impact also of the fund, the current opportunity, and future need of the sector in terms of digital transformation, particularly in the wake of the COVID-19. Thing will never be the same as we know. And how Council can continue to play a leadership role in supporting the Canadian art sector to adapt to digital world. I'm gonna stop there because we have many other things we want to research. We also want to do network mapping We also want to upscale the art in the digital world 2020. You know, that's the former research report that was done before. We are doing a new version of this one. So that's going to be interesting to see. This is just an overview of the partnership because I talked about the international impact a little bit before. One thing you have to know is that the Digital Strategy Fund actually really welcome international partnership. Of course, like Canada partners, of course, Canadian partners, but also we're not against any international partnership. So that's the beauty of it. So I think that helped to enhance the capacity of the art sector in Canada clearly. And, you know, if we can have exchange with others, other countries, this is just better. So as you can see, there's some in Australia as well. We have like, I think it's 6 partners. You know, those around there are successful applicant that you see. So it's a color. So when a round is split in 2, it's because you had 2 successful applicants. So it's 2 successful Canadian applicants, of course, because international organization cannot apply to the DSF, but they can collaborate. So that's simply to give you a little idea. And here's another visualization of this. You can see Australia, which is here. So that gives you, and the one that doesn't have any name, it's France. So I'll give you a little bit of an idea. And of course, as we can see, Ontario is one of the larger partner pool, if you want. Then comes Quebec and United States too. It's really huge. Of course, we're just the big neighbor is just beside. So that's simply to give you a small idea. I'm gonna, go with the challenge. Maybe now, maybe later. I think I'll go later because we're gonna talk about that, Inga? So okay.
Yeah, no, let's talk challenges, absolutely. But
okay,
we'll.
Sure.
I think I want to invite Tammy and Jessa to chime in on that as well.
Okay, so you want to keep it? You want to start now, or you want to keep it for later on? Because we can talk about it later on. I didn't catch what you wanted.
Yeah, let's if we can get out of the screen sharing, Mark. And
perfect.
what I want to ask you a quick question, and I think that's where I'm going to ask Tammy next to share a couple of thoughts. The way that you talked about partnerships, I want to be clear that what you were talking about is arts-led partnerships, right? So, for instance, I'm an independent consultant with very big ideas in my head, but I can't actually apply. I couldn't apply to that. I had to figure out how to navigate finding arts organization partners to try to make big things happen. That was a very deliberate part of the design, I'm imagining.
Yeah, well, absolutely. You know, like you got to know about, I mean, Canadian folks know, but that the DSF was, we wanted to have the knowledge being developed in the arts sector, not necessarily by the arts sector, because we cannot, we need input from outside community clearly, and from consultant and from other organization and from some other consortium. And that's what we saw actually during the year of the implementation of the DSF. Like at the start, I would say collaboration were difficult for some organization, but not for others. They were already there, but the more we were growing old in the fund, or the let's say the digital literacy was raising in the arts sector, the more we saw those partnerships. And now what we see though, and that we're really careful about that each time we're assessing our committee are assessing a file, is, okay, where does the knowledge go? Like, is it like simply someone, an external party that comes in the organization or the consortium and tell them what to do? Or do they learn, where will that be kept? And where will it grow? And that's really important. Talking about knowledge, a big challenge is to share the knowledge. That's part of the criteria we have. So how do organizations share knowledge? And on the side of the fund, we haven't given the tool necessarily. That's one thing that we see, to be able to facilitate this sharing of knowledge. Like we're thinking about since some years about sharing knowledge network. You know, how do we put that up? Is that the role of the Canada Council? We think so, but you know, in the same time, Canada Council was always arm's length with the arts sector. We want to support it, but we want the arts sector to be the master of their destiny, clearly, you know. And as an artist, I'm also a digital artist, I totally agree with that, you know. So it's a fine kind of tune. Now we're trying to consult a lot, actually, do a lot of survey because we're into the impact research. I mean, I'm sure some of you were contacted already or give your 10 cents or 50 cents or $2 on it. Anyway, so and that's really important. But each time we consult, there's always a little part that goes into the deployment of new program and how the fund can be, what it can become. But we're still there, you know, like now it's not clear because the Canada Council is also working on a strat plan for the next 4 years. So everything will fall down. But let's talk about challenges.
Yeah.
Talked enough.
So no, thank you so much, Mark, and thank you so much for that overview. Tammy, speaking of challenges, I mean, you've been involved in with a number of arts organizations. You yourself started out as an arts administrator with a very long career, moving to become a tech startup entrepreneur. Can you just, from your sort of lived experience, being basically a service provider, what are some of the observations that you've had in terms of how those programs have been working?
So I wear two hats. So I'm a service provider. So I'm actually, when it comes to the design of the Digital Strategy Fund, I officially cannot speak to the Canada Council for the Arts. It is our nonprofit arts partners that applies for the Digital Strategy Fund. I know Mark very well. Of course, we talk, but it's all informal. Officially, you know, the way the structure is, we build partnership with our nonprofit arts partners to go after grant applications. So as a founder of a semantic technology company, the reality is we came up with this digital semantic strategy for the arts sector to actually transform the digital ecosystem in which arts organizations live in. That needs to change because of the way web has changed. You know, the type of work that we do is fundamental to digital transformation. Without machine readable data, very little digital transformation can happen. So we had to shop and I'm speaking very freely and very openly. In reality, we had to shop our idea to a nonprofit arts organization and sell them on the idea of a semantic web transformation for the sector, which is a really hard thing to do because we're speaking to performing arts companies whose mandate is not semantic web. Already, for the tech person, for the computer scientist graduating out of university that studied computer science, semantic web is a niche and very difficult thing to understand in the field of digital technology. So to shop this idea to an arts organization, I'm not selling a website here. This was, you know, I was very fortunate to find some visionary partners in the arts sector to support this idea, but it's not without its bumps along the way. You know, you find the visionary people and institutions move around. You need to convince boards. So there's a lot of hurdles to go over before you can actually get an idea lifted on the ground. And that's 2 years of time. 2 years of time before funding gets to the project, before approval gets to the project, not the funding, not the actual, you know, cash in the bank so you can start doing a project. So, you know, this is 2.5 years in. So as a service provider, you know, actually, you know, as an arts administrator turned tech startup and founder, that means 2.5 years of risk for what I think is, and what are my partners and the colleagues that I work with in the art sector today is, you know, for the digital transformation of the ecosystem of which the Canadian arts sector lives in. So it's not without its challenges. And I think the Digital Strategy Fund for companies that are kind of off, kind of hybrid, don't fit. I don't fit a regular startup. I can't get money from a regular startup incubator because they're looking for revenue. And once they start looking for revenue, it means I can't focus my attention on the art sector because you can't make money on the art sector. You know, I mean, not in the way that I'm doing because I'm doing a tech start as a consultant, completely different. But so innovation, of which the Digital Strategy Fund, I think, is there to fund and projects to support. Innovation for me, or what I've learned, happens between the cracks. It happens where things don't fit guidelines. And those are the interesting spots, is in between the cracks. I'm learning the hard way, that's where innovation happens, at least from our perspective. And there you go.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, you know, part of what we're doing here today is we're drawing the curtain back a little bit, right? So I've very deliberately invited a few of my colleagues, you know, who have a great variety of expertise and experience with this. Jessa Agalo, speaking of innovation happens in the cracks, that might be a good segue to talk about a little bit of the work that you're doing. You're spearheading several projects, I think, not exclusively funded through the Digital Strategy Fund, but benefiting from funding in that arena. Do you want to talk a little bit about, you know, what's been amazing about having this influx of funding? I mean, that's an amount of money that we haven't seen before ever, right? But also there are some design challenges, perhaps, in program design challenges, and how have you been navigating some of that?
Yeah, sure. Just for some context, I can talk about what we are doing and then what's working and what's not working. So we started out by asking the question, what is a digital arts service organization? Is it different from a traditional arts service organization? Are they needed? Can ASOs become digital ASOs, or do we need whole new organizational models, whole new funding models, whole new service and revenue models to support a digital arts service organization? So actually, before the launch of the Digital Strategy Fund, we did our first digital arts service symposium, where that was the question: what is a DASO? Do we need them? If so, what should they do? Can ASOs become DASOs and also keep the traditional relationships that they have with the traditional services that are not digital? Because ASOs do amazing work with communities and with artists. And then with the Digital Strategy Fund, our first DSF, we've had 3 projects from the fund so far, and we're hoping for a 4th, waiting patiently for the results from the last deadline. The first project we did was the 2nd edition of the Digital Arts Services Symposium, and it was a 6-day conference, a national conference, 3 days digitally and 3 days online, on the ground here in Toronto. Our second project, actually at that conference, before I move on, at that symposium, we actually had Michael Chappell from Culture Counts come from Perth as one of our featured speakers. So we have a relationship with Australia, mostly because I have a strong interest, like Tammy, in data and analysis and analytics and business intelligence of data. So that was one of the key themes of that symposium. Our second Digital Strategy Fund project is looking at using human-centered design to figure out what does a post-capitalist society actually look like around ownership, stewardship, control, and equity and accessibility of digital economic systems and platforms and tools. So we're actually we're using the fund, and this is what I love about the fund, is it's open to experimentation and innovation and flexibility on how you want to use the money. So we're both building an open source technology software platform, but we're also working with artists in residence or thought leaders that are working with us to design a brand new corporate home for the technology that is a cooperative and will be owned and governed by the artists. And the design that we're proposing is a for-profit cooperative where we can share revenues and with the artists themselves so they can financially benefit from it. Not only have ownership and control of the technology that's being developed and the data that's being captured, but they can also financially benefit from it. Our third project, and that's ongoing, it's a major project, and we're not done. Our third project is looking at creating a national innovation ecosystem. Broadly looking at how can we break down cross-sectoral silos, industry silos, equity silos, bring impacted people that don't know anything about digital or heavily impacted about digital and have no power or feel they have no power or they're not ready, they have literacy challenges about digital, along with leaders and champions and funders and government, and how can we steward collectively, collaboratively, a strategy for digital transformation after the fund is over. Now that it is officially over, just how can we bring a collaboration of community leaders together and impacted people with the idea of scoping out the creation of an alliance that can steward greater access and greater collaboration around this big thorny question of what is digital transformation. So those are at a high level, those are the three projects. What works, I think, is the flexibility, allowing to create new organizations, including for-profit organizations that are external to our current organizations. The multiple streams, so we have literacy, platform building, alliance building, lots of flexibility in terms of the fund itself and the type of work. I think that's amazing. The rolling deadlines we haven't used, but I know for the community that's been very important. What isn't, or what's been a challenge? It's not, I won't say it doesn't work, but what is a challenge that I would point out for us anyway? We're not a startup anymore. We're 5 years in to our history as an organization. But all of the grants, we don't have any core funding. So we're a project to project still. And we've raised $1.1 million from the fund so far, from the Digital Strategy Fund for our work, but none of it's eligible, none of it puts us towards the eligibility of getting the requirements to meet core grants. It's strategic funding, so we may actually end up having like a lot of major work, and then we're gonna go blah, 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 and lose a little bit of capacity because we aren't on track to get core operating as a result of this work. That's a major challenge. Another challenge is that as much as I support experimentation, innovation, flexibility, failure is not enough. And failing is good learning, right? But when you are a small not-for-profit with no core funding, failure isn't an option. You don't want to fail because you have this short timeline of the funding. You want to succeed. So there is a certain pressure, yes, experimentation, but okay, not experiment so badly that you completely fail and you can't go forward. There is an openness to more experimentation if there was longer term funding, but without longer term support, I think there's a bit of a limitation on what we're going to do for risk and experimentation. A couple more things I mentioned, and then we can just have a conversation. But in the early days, it was really hard to connect with like-minded or people with different points of view around what is digital transformation. We're all working in silos because we didn't know who had funding and who was working on or interested in digital issues. We're trying to respond to that by creating an ecosystem map as a part of one of our digital projects, so we can make different projects that are looking for either users or funding, or just want to find out who else is interested in things that they are in. So I think a fund in the future, whether Australia creates a similar one, to create a stream that supports ecosystem building, networking, incubation of different projects from the very beginning. So we're not waiting 2 or 3 years to find out who has got projects, that right out of the gate, there is an ecosystem, a supportive ecosystem of everyone who applies, everyone who gets money, that there's some kind of permission-based adoption to share your information with other, so that there's a sense of a community. The last thing I would mention in terms of funding is if there was greater collaboration with other major funders, I think that would be really helpful to find matching or supporting funds to match the Canada Council. The Canada Council Digital Strategy Fund was seen as the first funder in, which is great. But if there was greater collaboration from the outset with, say, innovation, science, economic development, or economic development, technology development, where there's some significant funding available, if Canada Council could help with some of these larger national projects to access or streamline the proposal process to access some of this other funding, I think that would help scale up some of our larger projects, not necessarily ours, but some of our larger projects that are trying to work across the whole country. And the last thing I would mention around that is exporting to international markets and scaling up to international markets is another huge challenge that I think we need support and consideration for some of the larger projects.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. It's quite the survey you're giving us there. And I think one of the extraordinary things when I'm hearing you speak, I'm reminded in my own work, I'm working on about $2 million worth of the 88 million. Like I've been involved in $2 million worth of successful proposals. And I'm just an independent consultant at the edge of Canada at this point. Yeah. But I'm working with arts organizations. Atlantic Presenters is on the call today. We're doing a digital literacy project, national in scope, with the home of the Atlantic Presenters. But I'm also involved in building technology. I'm involved in a couple of projects now. One is the pitch.ca future website, which is going to be a software application that is getting built. And we were lucky enough for Canada Council funding. We secured a very large grant through the Digital Strategy Fund, and we're now beginning to leverage that up into exactly as you're saying, additional funding. So the Yukon government has come on board with another significant contribution through economic development, right? So we're kind of trying to navigate that very thing that you're talking about is like, what's next? And I'm now starting to talk about what's the venture capital angle on building that kind of a software, because the funding will run out. We get to build it, but then it has to get maintained. So there's a lot of sort of pieces all of a sudden that we're thinking about in some of those projects we're working on. Because I think that the partnership, you know, the intrinsic partnership part that this fund sort of demanded of everybody in the ecosystem, both on the consulting side, the arts organizations, the technology companies, is actually kind of ingenious. From my standpoint, it's delayed a bunch of stuff. Like I would have been ready in 2017 with my big idea around digital platforms, but I didn't have an arts partner. So I had to continue to, you know, have those conversations. And now there's something happening. We got a proposal in for the current round. We'll find out soon and we'll push forward in one way or the other. So to me, in fact, the most frustrating thing has been delay.
Yeah. And that's probably why we had only $6 million worth of funding in year one, because people just didn't have the partnerships. I was working for several years prior to that fund, trying to develop the knowledge and readiness and the partnerships for a proposal. So we were ready, but most of the community was not. Yeah, I found the same thing, which is why now I'm doing digital literacy, right? But that was the first big project I got funded. Tammy, go ahead.
The lag, absolutely. I think we all sort of lived through that same lag in the beginning of the fund of trying to build the right partnerships because the art sector was not ready. But also because I have to have, for the one idea that we're just working, I mean, Jessa, oh my God, that's amazing what you're doing. I have one very simple idea that I just chewed on like a dog with a bone that I'm not letting go. But I still have to work with multiple arts partners, multiple not-for-profits. And every time I do that for this one idea, I have to shoehorn into what do they get out of it? They need to get something out of it. So I have to bend myself into a pretzel for this arts partner. And for the other arts partner, we have to bend this way. And for this art partner, we have to bend this way. They want this, they want that. And we still have to maintain the eye on the prize for the bigger picture. So my frustration actually with the Digital Strategy Fund is that we have no place to put the big idea down on. We have no place, I don't have a body or to see the big picture of the idea over the years. We have to keep it together in our head, in our plans for the idea, but there's no place where we can apply, this is the big picture, this is what going to be the sum is for the big picture. Is this, you know, how can we make this happen? So it's breaking it into pieces and building it in a ladder in multiple pieces and keeping that all together has incredible challenges. Where we would have loved to, these are our arts partners, this is the big vision, this is what it is. We have to fit into the application, and it's in chunks, everything's in chunks. So it's hard to weave the vision in these little pieces everywhere.
And just to be very clear, I think everyone here is incredibly grateful for this inspired fund to exist. I don't
absolutely.
think that is not what anyone is saying here.
No.
And I think, but
I don't think it's a process of a digital strategy fund. I think it's also the nature of the Canada Council for the Arts, you know, to support the arts sector. You know, we all understand that, and that's why we have to work with or mandate, basically, you know, like, and also clearly hear everything, you know, that you're saying, Tammy and Jess, clearly better collaboration with other investment fund, you know, like, and also a social investment fund, you know, that we have in Canada. Like, it's amazing, you know. Yes, I hear you clearly, but we can navigate into the water we have, for now.
Oh, absolutely.
You know? Yeah.
Absolutely. We got a comment from Jim Lawson just a few moments ago. It says, it sounds like Canada is light years ahead of where things are up here in Australia. Great to hear this program, how this program got started. And I think it's good for us to keep that in mind. If anyone, you know, sort of listening to our conversation has comments or questions, this is a good time to bring those forward, and we'll address them as they show up, of course. And we'll just continue our conversation, of course, and weave that in. One of the pieces that I find interesting now, that like towards the end of sort of a major investment such as a digital strategy fund, where we have all of these arts organization-led, or artist-led, important, often resulting in true transformation projects. I am now looking at what does it actually mean to have all of these, to have in some places technology products, software housed in an arts organization, and is there any conflict around the arts mandate? Arts organizations are good at the things they do; they're not technology companies, right? And where is that going to net out? So I'll be interested to see whether some of our colleagues end up, you know, hiving off the technology side, creating some other entities for that, or how that sustaining those innovations.
We're definitely doing that because we want to have access to charitable status, and open source software is not something that we can do. So we're going to have to carve it off into another entity.
Yeah, there's a question here about, was it hard to get people collaborating? Lenin is asking. We see lots of examples of competition getting in the way. What's your view on that?
Well, yeah, so I think it comes to who we are as people. And like, do we value the human relationships and a collaborative, cooperative approach? Like, not everyone does. Like, that's not the first thing they think about. For us and for my work, it's the human collaboration that comes first. And whether it's how we just work is based on that. And so I'm not interested in competition. I'm interested in solving systemic issues in the sector. So the Digital Strategy Fund, I think, is trying to empower the arts sector to solve some of the biggest problems in the sector, which are systemic, which are sectoral, and require a collaborative approach. But not everyone understands or is ready for working from a sharing, collaborative, open source mindset. particularly when you start thinking about, okay, how are you going to fund it long term? If it's open source, what's your revenue model? And people just weren't aware of like platform cooperatives as a solution to a sharing economy, exploitive sharing economy. That it's possible, there are models out there, and I think that would have been something that would have been helpful for the Strat Fund itself to talk about, have some literacy for the sector. Here are some models to consider or to learn about as potential revenue models to support greater sharing and collaboration in your projects. I think that would have been helpful.
Tammy, did you have a comment to share?
Okay, I wear two hats, and this is coming from the hat of working 30 years in the nonprofit performing arts sector in like contemporary dance theater, touring, very traditional performing arts. The performing arts sector and the cultural sector, we use technology. Our level of technology use is that we use technology today, and we're not the only sector that does this, by the way, is that we apply technology to replicate the way we work in the analog world. A lot of our structures and systems, we have the veneer of technology slapped on, and we just, in the back end, it just sort of replicates the way we know how to work in the analog, real brick and mortar world. So I think a lot of the challenges, you know, on top of what Jess said, to add to what she's saying, I agree with what she's saying in regards to the competition, but on top of that, it's all about our habits and how we work, and our sort of worldview is hard to shift. We know what we know, and we haven't shifted our behavior to encompass the way the digital world works. And we should not feel bad about ourselves because we're not the only sector that's doing that. There's all the other sectors, tons of other industrial sectors are doing the same thing. So this digital transformation is shifting. How does the world work when everything is connected to everything else? How does the world work when all the knowledge of the world can be found online? Or that you know, how does the world work when people are using machines to do things for them without even knowing it? So, you know, we are applying our 20th century operation systems and our structures and our businesses and our organizations, and going, oh my God, it's not working in the 21st century. And there's a few handful of companies that are racing towards the future, and the rest of us are all catching up. And what this digital strategy fund offers the arts sector is, okay, we're gonna close this gap, and if we close this gap well, we can be leaders for other sectors as well. You know, basic things like discoverability online, having machine readable metadata as a basic element for a building block for discoverability. And it's, without realizing it, it's also the means to build a more democratic internet. So what we're focused on at Culture Creates is we're motivated by, we're going to build a more democratic internet because we just found the little building block that's going to help us do that. And the resulting outcome is better discoverability for the art sector. So it's the shift in mentality. And actually we had a discussion today. It's, you know, everyone says you're a data company, technology company. It's actually not technology. We're not using any new technology. It's actually what our biggest challenge is, people's behaviors all through the sector. And it's not just the arts, it's all other sectors as well. I hope I make sense, but that's,
yeah, that was a, yeah, I think you are. I see even we are nodding.
Well,
I
no,
see
you know, I think that, you know, because it started with, was there like challenges in the partnership and things like that, you know, like through the 4 years of the Digital Strategy Fund, we saw all the change that happened, you know, and why those change happen is because of the individual. It's not necessarily only because of the technology, because technology is great, absolutely, but innovation doesn't pass necessarily only by technology. Of course, it's helping, like, yeah, like you mentioned, Tammy, everything is linked, everything is on the network. I would say a librarian would have a good discussion with you when you say that all the knowledge is on the internet, but that's something else. And that's what we see also in Digital Strategy Fund, and right now we're in the midst of thinking about how we will transfer the knowledge that we have towards the new proposition that we'll do to the art sector. And of course, we're thinking about innovation, etc. And we're going in a lot into well, wait a minute, what is innovation? First of all, it's hard to find one definition. There's multiple, but technically, normally, and the base of it are human, individual, or individual, or digital individual as well. So I mean, it's all a mix, which is really interesting. Living right now, it's really I'm Canada Council. It's really interesting, I must say. All the change we see. Anyway, I'll stop here.
Yeah, absolutely. There was a question that popped up about that very thing about what's the infrastructure needed in our communities to democratize digital engagement. What's it going to look like? Who's going to pay for it? So I think Thami actually answered the side in terms of the, that shared data and the collaboration pieces that we've been talking about are actually a huge aspect of that. Where I live, and anywhere in rural Canada, basic internet access is also a huge requirement. I don't live in a place in the north here. I mean, we have communities that are on satellite internet very slow. With very low data caps. That doesn't compare to our big cities in the country. So that inequity is a huge barrier there.
I think there's some basic infrastructures that need to, I think in the future, if countries are toying with the idea of building a digital strategy fund like the Canada Council, they need to think what type of basic infrastructures they need to put in place first that can speed up to avoid sort of the stuff that we lived in the beginning, which I'm happy to have lived, it's a learning process. But what we've learned is you could speed this up by laying some groundwork already. So when arts organizations who are not tech companies are funneled through, they have something to attach themselves, a digital infrastructure that's there that makes it a lot easier for innovative projects to be built. And some of those digital infrastructures, it's like building a road. You want people to travel, but you have no roads. Well, you need to build a road first and then get people to travel and fund them so that they travel.
And it's human, it's humans, it's actual people with skills and knowledge and partners that are interested in receiving proposals, but it's also hardware. Having a shared server or capacity to a shared network and internet access, of course. But as we start developing software platforms, we can't all keep spending the costs of acquiring our own servers and our own hardware. There needs to be a national infrastructure in place if we're really going to sustain and innovate in a sustainable way.
And I think the geographies of Canada and Australia are similar. There is a few very large big cities, and the rest of us, the most of the land is very rural and remote, but the number of people in that is much smaller, of course. So it's a similar challenge. Mark, can you enlighten us on the following question? Was it a huge advocacy effort to get this fund established? We don't see that scale of investment in Australia. It wasn't really about advocacy per se, was it?
Let's say, well, I mean, advocacy is always part of what Canada Council is doing, close to Heritage Canada and the government and everything, actually Canada Council and Heritage Canada are working really together, especially with the COVID crisis that we live. You saw also the result with increase in the emergency fund that we will receive soon again. So that's all really interesting. But the advocacy before the fund came actually was done, clearly, and remember, and I don't want to go too much in politics right now, but we were in a time of a more conservative government that was not so keen to open and raise necessarily the amount that we received. The Canada Council per se didn't cut it neither. But then there was a certain change in the government, so, and then we saw a big raise, actually we saw the Canada Council had double the money it could play with for the next 5 years. So that was really important, and that's how we were able to put that much money into the fund. You know, I don't think that if we hadn't had this raise, you know, of course the fund would have existed without all the 88.5 million to spend, clearly, you know, but the intention was there, you know. So that didn't stop. So it was not necessarily easy, but it was not so hard neither, because everything was in place, you know. So, and it was not chance. It was not by chance. We have people in Canada Council that are working really well and that, you know, continue to work now to pursue that, you know, and that's interesting. But there was a lot of research and survey, like I mentioned before, you know, with those slides, and that was really important and interesting to see. And we knew that when we were going to offer the fund, the art sector was not necessarily all ready for it, you know, and it was mentioned by Jessa and Tammy, of course, and Laurie. I'm pretty sure you have your view on that as well. So not so difficult, but a lot of work, I would say, you know, and chance, you know, timing, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of timing, I think you just gave me my perfect segue from digital transformation to what happens when in the midst of all of this, COVID hits. And I think, Randy, you're working for Canadian Heritage. That's the federal government entity that deals with arts and culture and sports and things of that nature. Canadian Heritage made some very fast decisions very quickly with the support of obviously the government at large dealing with COVID. Can you just talk for us for a couple of minutes about what happened, what some of those, you know, sort of aid programs really are looking like, and how that's shaking out right now?
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm so happy to be able to join you today, and I'm joining you from Ottawa, Ontario, Canada, where I respectfully acknowledge that I live and work on the unceded traditional territory of the Algonquin Nation. And yeah, thank you for setting that up, Inga. Obviously, when the pandemic hit, it brought an unprecedented period of colossal change and impact to the arts, cultural heritage, and sports sector, with cancellations, closures of facilities, bringing enormous financial and organizational pressure to organizations. And so the Government of Canada, and in particular the Department of Canadian Heritage, has committed itself to ensure that we work with these sectors to ensure their survivability, and to keep these organizations and these assets in place. So I'm with the Department of Canadian Heritage. As Inga mentioned, we are the federal government of Canada department responsible for arts, culture, and heritage. We have a very wide portfolio, which includes the Canada Council for the Arts. So we work in complementarity and in collaboration with the Canada Council, as well as some of the other key agencies like Telefilm Canada and the Canada Music Fund, or the Canada Media Fund. And so with that in mind, in April of 2020, when the pandemic was at the beginning of the pandemic, the Canadian government announced a $500 million fund, the COVID Emergency Support Fund for Cultural Heritage and Sport Organizations. And this basically was to provide temporary relief to these organizations who were facing significant financial loss, and to ensure business continuity for these organizations so that their viability could be continued. And this fund was administered by the Canada Council for the Arts, the Department of Canadian Heritage, the Canada Media Fund, and Telefilm Canada. And the fund distributed funding to over 10,000 recipients between June and September of 2020. And the funds were delivered in two phases. The first phase went out to primarily to existing recipients of existing programs within these agencies. And then the second phase went out to organizations that were not existing recipients. And so organizations that we didn't necessarily have a funding relationship with, but were also very much being impacted by the pandemic. This the fund was in complement to a suite of universal measures that the Canadian government had put in place, including the Canada Emergency Response Benefit, which was a benefit for individual workers who had lost their jobs or had jobs had been impacted that could apply for temporary assistance. There was also the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy, which was for businesses that they could use to supplement and offset wage costs. And then there were some business support programs, business credit availability program, and a emergency commercial rent assistance program as well. So these were all part of a larger suite of programs. And then as the pandemic continued through the summer and into the fall, the government renewed its commitment to support for the industries that had been the hardest hit by the pandemic. So that included travel and tourism, hospitality, and of course the cultural industries, including the performing arts. And with that in mind, in the fall, the Canadian government announced an additional $181.5 million, and Mark alluded to this earlier, to the Canada Council and the Department of Canadian Heritage to help support the sector by providing work opportunities to cultural workers and to transition in the planning and the presentation of COVID-safe events, both live and digital, during this unprecedented time. So the details of that funding will be coming out shortly, but it's another significant investment that will be an important contribution to the recovery of the sector. I think just in a more general sense, another thing that I wanted to share is that obviously on top of all of this, we are still running our regular business. So that is to still continue to deliver the programs that support the arts and culture and heritage sectors in Canada. So I'm with the arts branch at the Department of Canadian Heritage, and we are responsible for a suite of programs that provide support for cultural infrastructure. I think, Inga, you mentioned that at the beginning of the session. So the Canada Cultural Spaces Fund that provides support for the construction and renovation of cultural facilities, as well as the purchase and installation of specialized equipment. We also have a program called the Canada Cultural Investment Fund, which provides support for building resilience and best business practices for cultural organizations. And then the two programs that I'm directly responsible for are the Canada Arts Training Fund, which supports the national training schools in Canada for professional careers in the arts. And finally, the Canada Arts Presentation Fund, which is probably the program that is the most linked to what we're talking about today with regard to supporting arts festivals and arts presenters in all parts of the country. So obviously the two programs that I'm responsible for, there was a huge impact on the recipients under those programs with the COVID pandemic. And immediately under both programs, we recognized the need to have to be as flexible and to adapt as much as we could in order to ensure that our regular funding could continue to flow to organizations, despite the fact that maybe they've had to either cancel their events, modify their events, or adapt to a new way of engaging with their audiences, either in a digital format or in ways that would respect the physical social distancing that is required during this time. So particularly with the Canada Arts Presentation Fund, we recognize that using virtual and online opportunities for either the presentation or outreach activities was essential to this response. So we offered increased flexibility to address that within our funding programs, looking at offering flexibility around the types of costs that were eligible to include digital and other ways of reaching audiences. And so that was another important part of how we responded to the situation. The last piece I'll just mention is, because it's got an international angle, is that as part of Canada's creative export strategy, the Canada Arts Presentation Fund was awarded 5 years of funding to support the reciprocal opportunities of advancing the discoverability of Canadian artists by providing support to take delegations of Canadian arts presenters to international marketplaces, at the same time to bring international buyers to Canada to see Canadian artists. And so, of course, that kind of reciprocity, that kind of travel is not happening now. So again, we are adapting that in order to do that in virtual and online forums. And that's another part of where we've tried to expand our flexibility to ensure that those activities happen and that exchange and that reciprocity of cultural exchange can happen. So in a nutshell, those are the sort of the key messages that I wanted to share today, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Oh, that's awesome. I just want to emphasize, re-emphasize a couple of things you said early on. One was the initial additional, like the initial COVID money was 500 million. Like that's $500 million. That's a lot of money to make available on on no notice whatsoever. So obviously there was a decision somewhere in there, it seems to me, that's about saying we want to make sure we protect the sector and that we don't let it disappear, because to build it up again is daunting and probably more expensive at the end of the day. The other thing I want to sort of just say is, I think you said that not only did you sort of farm money out, COVID relief funds, to your existing organizations that you were granting to, but to some of the unsuccessful ones, but that were eligible, which I think is also kind of a remarkable piece to contribute to that. I want to ask. Sorry, go ahead, Randy.
No, I was just going to say, yeah, that was something that was done in at the Canadian Heritage, and also I think through the Canada Council also worked with first-time recipients or first-time applicants as well, recognizing that that there was a distinct need in those areas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I want to ask Laurie. So you're the executive director of a regional presenting network. Your members are, by and large, performing arts presenting organizations and festivals across the 4 Atlantic provinces. So you get a lot of day-to-day on-the-ground feedback, certainly in terms of COVID and what you as a regional network and your colleagues across the country have done similar things as you have, of course. Can you just give us a little bit of insight of what has it been like in the last year, and how important has it been that we got a little bit of a leg up, perhaps, in terms of something like the Digital Strategy Fund enabling much more work already moving into that?
Right, thanks, Inga. So as Inga said, I'm Laurie Gillis, and I am honored to live and work on the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people under the Peace and Friendship Treaty, and that's here on the east coast of Canada. And I pay my respects to the elders and caretakers of this beautiful land that I am so lucky to live on. And as Inga said, we're a regional touring network on the East Coast, and it's mostly rural here. We have some remote and some urban areas as well. Just to give you some context, the total population here is about just over 2 million people, and we're in an area that's smaller than New South Wales. So we're part of the larger landmass of Canada, but we're a small kind of region there. We're actually closer to the UK, or it's easier for us to get to the UK than it is for us to fly across the country to the west coast of Canada. We kind of hang off the edge of the continent here. And our network is made up of all kinds of presenters, what we call presenters here. So those are folks who put performing artists on stage. So performing arts centers, festivals, community volunteer presenters who rent out the church hall to present artists in their community. And we have just over 100 members of the network, and they range in size from 100-seat converted church to 1,000-seat nationally recognized performing arts center. So it's quite a diverse group. And we're a service organization, so we've been very busy this year trying to help folks along through the challenges they've been facing. So we typically provide touring support when folks are able to tour. Professional development is a big thing we do, and capacity building with our folks. And we also produce a showcasing conference, which I wouldn't say it's kind of like APAM, but it's much smaller, on a much smaller scale, and includes all genres of music in addition to dance and theater. So when the pandemic hit North America, we were in the middle of delivering our digital strategy project, entitled Making Tomorrow Better, Taking Digital Action in the Performing Arts. Quite a lofty title, but I think in the end, it kind of hit home for folks. So it was a national digital literacy initiative, and it brought practical digital know-how to the performing arts sector. That was our goal, addressing basic things like, people knowing what their digital footprints are, getting a grip on the various online platforms, to ultimately hopefully become more like digital adapters and maybe even digital innovators. So we were well down that road, giving live in-person workshops across the region and across the country. And we were just about to go out on the road again here in Atlantic, Canada, when things got locked down in mid-March. So we quickly changed tactics, and working with Inga and Tammy, actually, Inga is the consultant that she mentioned on the project. We pulled together and created a 6-part workshop series online that we launched actually on the day that the first in-person workshop was supposed to take place. So on March 23rd. So we were really, because we had access to Inga, because we were part of this project, we turned it around on a dime. It was really quite amazing. And when I say we, I mean Inga. So, but response to the workshops that we offered was overwhelming. The first session we did, it came together very quickly, and it was called Digital Communications for Live Arts Presenters. Like, your basic, we're in panic mode. How are we going to communicate with our audiences? And we had over 300 folks register, which, it's a typical number we would have for something like that would be 30. So going digital allowed us to reach beyond our geographic borders, and we promoted the sessions across the country, and found that it was really obvious that there was a great need for this kind of professional development and really connection to each other. I think in the immediate aftermath of the lockdown, people needed to figure out how to connect with their audiences and communities without live performances. Because of the Making Tomorrow Better project, we had a fantastic consultant on board that enabled us to take advantage of the situation and offer the sector something it desperately needed in the very early days of the crisis. And we also used our learning and our very new experience in the delivery of digital programming to produce our annual conference, Contact East, virtually. So Contactless East was one of the few Canadian performing arts conferences held in 2020. And I credit the Digital Strategy Fund for our level of comfort with that technology and our ability to deliver that, not just to our members, but to folks actually from across the country. They joined us from all across the country. And so we were also fortunate enough to be a partner in the development of a digital showcasing platform that Inga mentioned, called the pitch.ca. And it was envisioned as a service to bring artists and arts presenters together, a business-to-business kind of platform where a trusted community of touring artists, agents, performance companies, and presenters can come together to discover live digital performances. So as Inga mentioned, we're a large landmass with a small population. And we have artists and presenters who are on the fringes of that country. Not everyone's able to attend showcasing opportunities, which are really important when it comes to touring and making a living as a performing arts artist. So this is the seed that kind of the pitch grew from, like connecting those folks from the fringes to where the business happens. The pitch, the platform, it will not replace live showcase opportunities or live performances. In fact, none of the things we've been doing virtually will ever replace or completely replace live, but will augment and complement those live events. So, or perhaps like now when live events can't happen, they will support virtual showcase opportunities. For example, half my colleagues across the country who have already decided to host a fully online versions of their showcase conferences. And the other half of us are still optimistic and hoping to hold hybrid conferences of in-person and virtual events. So there's a real opportunity here for the pitch to play a role in some of these 2021 conferences, of course, depending on the platform rollout and the timing of things. But that's something we never would have expected when we submitted our funding application to the Digital Fund back in the fall of 2019 before the pandemic hit. So I'm one of those arts organizations that's probably, you know, we're on the lag. We were kind of slow coming to the party, but so happy that we have been able to make connections through Inga and Tammy to really bring some great basic knowledge to this region and across the country. You know, our intention with both of these projects is to help build capacity and innovation in the sector. And over the last year, that has shifted to almost a preservation kind of mode. As a sector, we find ourselves living in a more digital world, at least for the next little while. So it's been a real honor and treat to be able to work with Inga on these projects and bring our membership here some digital literacy that I think will serve them well moving forward.
Yeah, we do a lot of work together, don't we?
Yes.
This is not an
Happily
infomercial,
so.
that's just reality. There were a couple of questions here which are about how is creation and dissemination supported. I think part of the dissemination, you know, where Randy already touched on the additional funds that are there. Creation is, I think, if I'm correct, not actually funded through Canadian Heritage. That is funded federally through Canada Council. And then at the provinces, territories, and sometimes municipally, there is funding available for creation in any part of it. Mark, did you want to say anything about the support for individual artists in this sort of current time?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. I mentioned that a little bit before. You know, we had this digital creation special initiative from the fund, those micro kind of grant of 5,000 that were like more easy access to fund. That was really put up because of the COVID situation, you know, to keep people having work, clearly. Otherwise, we would have, like someone mentioned, I think it's you, Inga, that it would be enormous, like lost if artists are going to do something else, or tech, even, you know, like professional art professional will go somewhere else. And we see that actually a lot of people are thinking about how they're gonna live in the future. You know? Anyway, so we put that in place clearly. We also right now with Randy mentioned new funding, emergency funding that will be put really to make the art sector work. Creation will be a bigger part, you know, and how we deal with it in the digital or like not fund, because the digital fund will not be there anymore, but the transformation of the digital strategy fund, that's clear. And also, I would say that we have learned in digital, and that may be for future thinking. You know, I think that a lot of art organization and individual and group, for them, digital transformation passed by also creation, you know, which we could not really inscribe in the fund so far. You know, Digital Strategy Fund was not there to support creation. It was always kind of a blur line, you know, like why, you know, like we allowed like 15% of the grant you receive, or if you were successful, for creation or, you know, other activity that were not mainly supported by the fund. But was that enough? Not so sure. So we're still thinking about how we will support it better, in terms of creation. But clearly, it's going to transform. I think it's going to be better integrated. Let's say. Not just that though, because we now don't only want to support creation, because we do a lot in Canada Council support the creation of new work, in which digital is included as well.
Yeah, that's the Digital Strategy Fund itself was not designed for that, because those other programs are very much around and exist and all of that. There was also a quick question. I don't want us to run past time very much. We've got about 3 or so minutes left. But there was a question here about sort of the issue of algorithms. Some of us do a fair amount of work on thinking about algorithms, and challenges in terms of for emerging artists or less commercial artists, and sort of their, of online dissemination platforms such as Spotify, YouTube, etc. There is Jessa, I see you unmuted yourself. If you want to just give us a tidbit on some of the thinking you're doing specifically around, I guess, digital justice is the elevated sort of form that we're after.
Yeah, the concept of digital justice is really looking at algorithms and the whitewashing that's happening around a lot of algorithm technology that's built by white people, that's erasing Black and Indigenous and queer people in terms of the support that they're doing. So just the question of digital justice is, we're not going to change it right away, but looking at the ethics of artificial intelligence and of algorithms to make sure that, because we can't not have them, I think we rely on them in so many ways, but that their design is supported by the equity-seeking voices that are currently not being reflected in the design of these algorithms to begin with.
Tammy, go for it.
When we're talking about YouTube, Spotify, Google, or any of those huge behemoth multinational companies, their algorithms are attached to a business model that is for shareholder wealth. Mm-hmm. So we can, I agree with the ethics and everything, but we're not going to get in the middle of that. Like, no amount of ethics or justice is going to get in the middle an algorithm that is really based on a business model to make sure that the shareholder makes it their quota in the 4 quarters of their year. Mm-hmm. We're going to have to rethink the whole sort of capitalist society we live in if we want to sort of get in the middle of that. Mm-hmm. So what technology can do is that we have in our hands, when we structure our data and build digital infrastructures that allow adjacent capacity and access to metadata that other people could build on, you need to build those infrastructures that allow other types of algorithms to be built that are not based on those business models. So at the very least, and that's exactly what the work that we're trying to do in linking structured data. We build an infrastructure of data that another type of algorithm has a chance to be built. We're not going to change how Google builds an algorithm. It's just not unless we tell them stop being a business. I just don't see that happening.
Australia is suggesting that perhaps, Australia is suggesting perhaps we can change Google's business model. But it is possible. Yes. We don't have to accept.
I don't think they're going to change their business. They're just not going to do business in Australia, and then it allows other adjacent capacity. I'm all for Australia. In my last meeting, all for Australia going to tell Google to take a hike. But it's not because we're going to change Google. It's because we're going to be able to allow the potential and incentives and put incentives in place for other types of algorithms to be created that are not based on those values. That's, I think, the focus of justice, not changing Google, but allowing different values to exist. And we need to build those infrastructures and put those incentives in place as a society so we can have the digital justice that Jessa is talking about.
Mm-hmm. So obviously that very question is actually quite complex, like a lot of the things that we're talking about here today. To close us off, anyone want to venture one key piece of advice for Australia, if Australia was to create something similar as what's been happening in Canada? Any takers on that? Tammy, quickly.
You want to do one thing. If you have metadata available on your website, link it to an open graph. Make it available, share it, and link it to an open graph. That's your first step, a very important step in democratizing the web.
Anybody else? Piece of advice for Australia?
I will say quickly, give the sector a year to talk about the idea for the fund before you formally release it, and figure out where the gaps of literacy is, and have some small amounts of funding for people to think about what the gaps are, and then launch the bigger fund.
Mark.
Yeah, right from the start, I would say consult the art sector clearly and go up further than just the art sector. You know, like Tammy, you mentioned that at one point. So that brings the collaboration with many founders. You know, like if you could put together many of the founders of Australia, that would be marvelous. You know, like we are collaborating with Heritage Canada clearly. We could do more than that. We could collaborate way more. We could collaborate with Industry Canada as well. You know, like that's what we're thinking right now. That would be fantastic. And what I just said, and Tammy.
Yeah. Laurie, Randy, anything to add?
No, just no.
No,
Take full advantage. When it comes, take advantage. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm just very happy to have been part of the conversation and learning and listening to these great smart people. Thank you very much.
Awesome. My key piece of advice is act. Always default to doing something rather than waiting and doing nothing to make it perfect. Don't wait for perfect, just act. I want to thank all of you for participating here today. This has been a fascinating conversation. I could keep going. Maybe we'll have other opportunities. I also want to thank our absolutely extraordinary Auslan interpreter. You have been working very hard and been here this entire time. I thank you for all you've done to provide that service. Norm, Sarah, back to you.
Hey, listen, thank you very much, everyone. What a fantastic session. We really appreciate the time and energy and amazing thinking that you guys have brought to this conversation. It's incredibly timely for the Australian sector to be hearing and thinking about these things. There's such a lot we need to learn from other people who've been down this path before, and so it's a really generous thing that you guys have done for us today. We feel like it's just the very start of obviously a big, complex and multifaceted conversation. We'd be keen to, continue to have this conversation in different forms, maybe some more sessions through this arts in a digital world space, and maybe we could look at bringing in some other countries, some other key players. The Australia Council's at a stage of looking at developing some kind of strategy as well. So they may be at a stage of coming in and joining these conversations as well soon. I want to echo Inga's thanks for Susan. She's done an amazing job today, and her colleague who'd normally kind of come in and share the work with her wasn't able to make it. So Susan's bridged as much as she possibly could. Thanks very much to Ray and Tali for doing the live captioning that's been happening. So that's been excellent as well. To Elliot and to Boo Software Development for doing all the amazing behind the scenes work that they've been doing. For everyone who's joined us online. The live stream, once it's finished, will be available as a view for people to share and watch afterwards. So that's still there for people to use. And we wanted to also just let you know that unfortunately Lyndon, who was coming to do our traditional welcome, has been held up just with car trouble. So here's an apology, and will join us for the next get together. So apologies for that. And just to finally sort of say particularly thanks to Inga for an amazing job facilitating today's conversation and organising it, bringing the session together for us all. She's an amazing asset for you guys. So really delighted to be able to meet you through her and to hopefully continue to build this network of people as we move forward. So thank you all very much.